Welcome back to The Observable Unknown. Tonight, we turn not to the stars, nor to the cells, but to something far closer and far stranger, the sentences in our own heads. We like to imagine that we use language to describe experience, but what if language is also sculpting the experience it claims to report? What if grammar is not just a rule book, but a perceptual device, a lens that quietly corrals time, space, agency, even emotion? Let us begin with something simple. You look out a window and say, "The glass is fogged." A tiny sentence, subject, verb, adjective. But the mind has already made a choice. It decided that the subject is glass, not air, not humidity, not time. Every sentence is a small act of framing, a decision about what counts as figure and what sinks into ground. Language feels transparent, like air, yet it behaves more like climate. It sets the pressure systems inside which thought forms. It may be that we do not merely speak a language, we inhabit one. Tonight, I intend to ask, how have linguists and neuroscientists tried to measure this habitation? Can grammar really bias perception? And if so, what happens to consciousness when we learn a second language, or slip between codes, or fall silent? We will not treat language as decoration. We will treat it as neurology in slow motion, a system of patterns that trains the brain to notice certain contours of reality and to ignore others. In the early 20th century, Edward Sapir and his student Benjamin Lee Whorf proposed a radical thought. The structure of a language influences the structure of its speaker's experience. This came to be called linguistic relativity. Whorf, who worked as a fire insurance inspector, noticed that English speakers behaved more carelessly with empty gasoline drums than with full ones, even when the empty drums still contained explosive fumes. He argued that the word empty had hypnotized attention, making danger cognitively invisible. Sapir and Whorf looked at indigenous American languages whose grammars divided the world differently than English did. Some did not separate matter and form in the same way. Others encoded relationships rather than isolated objects. And some blurred the line between noun and verb. Their proposal was not that language locks us into a prison, but that it lays down grooves of habit where thought tends to run. Their claims were overextended for a time. Language determines thought became a slogan, then a caricature, and eventually a straw man. By the late 20th century, many psychologists dismissed the strong version of Whorf as untestable, yet the question would not die. The intuition remained. Our grammars might be quieter than we thought, but they are not neutral. At the turn of the 21st century, cognitive scientist Lera Boroditsky and her colleagues began to ask Sapir and Whorf's question with sharper tools. They designed experiments in which speakers of different languages had to perform the same task, but carried different grammatical expectations in their heads. In one line of work, speakers of languages with grammatical gender, such as German and Spanish, were asked to describe objects in English. In German, the word bridge is grammatically feminine, while in Spanish, it is grammatically masculine. When describing bridges in English, German speakers tended to choose adjectives like elegant and beautiful, while Spanish speakers leaned towards strong and sturdy. The object was the same, the grammatical history was not. In other experiments, speakers of languages that describe events differently were asked to recall accidents. English speakers often say, "She broke the vase." Speakers of some other languages, including Spanish, more naturally say, "The vase broke." When later asked who was responsible, English speakers were more likely to remember and assign blame, even when the mishap was clearly accidental. The grammar of agency had shaped the memory trace. Notice what is happening here. No one forgot how physics works. Everyone saw the same ball hit the same window. The difference appears not in raw perception, but in which aspects of the scene became salient, retrievable, morally loaded. Grammar had slipped into ethics. Now imagine a community where people do not say left and right very much. Instead, they speak of north, south, east, and west for everyday tasks. Research led by linguist Stephen C. Levinson studied such communities, including speakers of the Australian Aboriginal language Gugu Yimitir. These speakers use cardinal directions, not just for navigation, but for the most intimate details. There is an ant on your southwest leg, or move that cup a little to the north. When psychologists brought these speakers into a lab and rotated them in chairs, they could still point accurately to the cardinal directions. Their language had trained find an internal compass. Meanwhile, speakers of languages that favor egocentric coordinates like left, right, or in front often struggled with the same task. In other studies, speakers who habitually used east-west metaphors tended to lay out sequences of time along the cardinal axis rather than left to right. Language had not merely labeled space, it had tuned spatial and temporal attention into a coherent frame. This is grammars of perception in action. The way your community talks about location becomes the way your nervous system stabilizes both space and time. So far, we have looked outward, differences between communities, between languages, but there's a quieter frontier, the sentences no one else hears. Russian psychologist Lev Vygotsky argued in the 1930s that inner speech is internalized dialogue. Children first talk out loud to guide their actions. Now I put this here. Now I set that there. And later, that speech sinks inward, becoming thought. For Vygotsky, language is not pasted onto cognition, it is one of the tools from which cognition is built. Modern neuroimaging studies have since shown that inner speech recruits many of the same regions involved in external speech. The left inferior frontal gyrus, often linked to Broca's area, and portions of the superior temporal cortex, associated with auditory processing. When we talk in our heads, the brain behaves as if it is listening to itself. Think of the phrases you use privately, the way you scold yourself, reassure yourself, narrate your day. Each repeated sentence is a micro-ritual. Over years, inner speech becomes a kind of liturgy, an ongoing service whose deity is your own self-concept, a person who constantly uses the grammar of obligation. I must, I should, I have to, will inhabit a different nervous system than someone who defaults to the grammar of choice. I am choosing, I prefer, I decline. Language is not only about what we can express to others, it is about what we are permitted to feel as ours. Now consider those who live between languages. Bilingualism is not simply a larger vocabulary, it is a doubled set of grammars, metaphors, and defaults. Psychologist Ellen Biastock and others have spent decades studying how bilingual experience shapes attention and executive control. Bilinguals must constantly manage interference between active language systems, selecting one while inhibiting the other. This ongoing practice appears to train certain aspects of cognitive control, task switching, conflict monitoring, and selective attention. Other research has shown that bilingual individuals sometimes shift their moral judgments, emotional tone, and risk calculations depending on which language they're using. A decision framed in a first language may feel intimate, saturated with childhood associations. The same decision framed in a later learned language may feel cooler, more analytical, or sterile. The words are different, but so is the physiological backdrop: heart rate, skin conductance, activation in emotion-related networks. Here's the quiet revelation: to switch languages is to perform a controlled experiment on the self. You change the grammar, and the world refracts differently. The objects have not moved, your nervous system has. In that sense, bilinguals live with more than one grammar of perception installed. They can watch how agency, blame, tenderness, even humor reconfigure as the syntax changes. Why does any of this matter beyond academic curiosity? Because the grammars we inherit are not innocent. If your language constantly encodes who did what to whom, you may grow up in a culture of heightened blame and praise. If your language marks evidentiality, whether you saw something, inferred it, or heard it secondhand, you may cultivate a finer instinct for epistemic humility. If your inner speech is dominated by imperatives, you may experience life as command. If it is dominated by questions, you may live in permanent interrogation. Language is not merely descriptive, it is instructive. It tells your nervous system millisecond by millisecond what to treat as figure and what to let fade into ground. So the question becomes, can we choose our grammars? We may not be able to rewrite a whole language, but we can become artisans of our own inner speech. We can borrow structures from other tongues, experiment with new metaphors, soften the agent when shame has grown too sharp, or emphasize agency when we have forgotten our power. To adjust one's syntax is to adjust one's perceptual habits. To consciously revise one's inner language is a subtle act of neuroplasticity. That is the observable unknown at the heart of tonight's interlude. Perhaps consciousness is not just what happens in the brain, but what happens when the brain learns to speak to itself in a new grammar. As you move through the next day or two, listen to your own language. Notice how you tell the story of a setback, a joy, a simple task. Do you say, "This happened to me," or "I walked through this"? Do you say, "I am anxious," or "Anxiety is visiting"? Each small variation is a different map, a different climate, a different nervous system waiting to unfold. If this conversation stirs something in you, I would love to hear it. You can email me at theobservableunknown@gmail.com or text me directly at 336-675-5836. If these explorations matter to you, please take a moment to leave a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts. Those simple gestures genuinely help other listeners discover the observable unknown and join this ongoing inquiry. You can also find me on LinkedIn and on X, where I continue these conversations in written form. Search for my name, Dr. Juan Carlos Rey, and for The Observable Unknown. Thank you, as always, for thinking with me, feeling with me, and speaking with me at the edge where language and perception meet. Until next time, thank you for stepping with me into the observable unknown.